Hi, I'm Kristin, and I'm a certified Lamaze childbirth educator. This is a free online series of childbirth education classes based on the Lamaze Healthy Birth Practices. You'll get the most value by watching all the classes in the series in order, and you can visit my channel for the full playlist. If you find these video classes helpful, please like the video and subscribe to this channel, and consider donating via PayPal using the link in the description. If you'd like to take group childbirth classes in person with me, there's also a link in the description that shows you how to sign up. As always, keep in mind that the content in these classes does not constitute medical advice. Let's get started.
So, what are the most important things you'll learn in this video series? If possible, let your birth start naturally. Keep moving throughout labor to help baby move down and help you stay comfortable. Have your birth partner support you throughout your labor and birth. If possible, let labor and birth happen without medical intervention. Avoid lying on your back during labor and birth. Follow your instincts when laboring and pushing your baby out. Keep your baby with you after birth and try to breastfeed. And always surround yourself with people who support your wishes for birth and breastfeeding. As we go along in this series, you'll understand more about all of these points and why they're so important and what you can do in order to follow them. So let's talk a little bit about pregnancy anatomy. This is important to help you understand what's happening to your body as you approach labor, go through labor, and then push your baby out. So the first thing we want to look at is the uterus. You can see here in the diagram, the uterus is that big muscled organ that holds your baby. And then we have the amniotic sac, which is just inside the uterus. And that is the water-filled sac that holds your baby, keeps it healthy, keeps its skin soft, and provides it with nutrients. And then you see there the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord is that lifeline that connects the baby to the placenta. And the placenta is what brings the nutrients from the mother's body to the umbilical cord and then to the baby. And finally, I want to talk about the cervix. You can see here the cervix is a very small thing. You can see it down there by the baby's head. And it's kind of a thick, cushy kind of thing that if you touch the end of your nose, you can kind of get an idea of what the cervix normally feels like. During labor, something magical happens to the cervix. The cervix then begins to thin out, and that's called effacement. We'll talk more about that later. And as it thins out, it becomes so thin, almost as thin as paper. And that then allows the cervix to open up or dilate. And you'll hear about dilation during your labor as well. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So ultimately, you want the cervix to efface, which is to thin out, and then to open up. And that's the dilation part. And the dilation, of course, when it's 10 centimeters wide, that's when the baby's head can fit through it, and that's when you reach the pushing stage. We'll talk a lot more about dilation and effacement in just a moment. So let's take a moment to meet your placenta. Now, I want to give a little bit of a warning because if you're squeamish, you may not want to look at the picture of the placenta. It is a part of the body, and so if blood kind of makes you feel a little squishy, you might want to turn away for a moment or two. But I do want to explain the very, very important organ called the placenta. Okay, so this is a placenta, and you can see it's actually kind of large. It's full of blood, and you see that umbilical cord that's attached to it, and that umbilical cord would be attached then to the baby. Let's learn a little bit more about it. It's truly an amazing organ. It connects the mother and the baby, and the mother sends nutrients to the baby through this placenta. the placenta is attached to the inside of the uterus, and then through the umbilical cord, it sends nutrients to the baby. It provides oxygen and nutrients, and it's delivered after the baby is born. Now, something to consider is that most mothers, when they deliver their placenta, they don't necessarily notice. And that's because she has just pushed her baby out, which is a lot harder to deliver than a placenta. And she's all full of love hormones, and she's so happy to meet her baby for the first time, and she's holding this baby in her arms. And she's so preoccupied with all of that she's not thinking about this soft, squishy thing that she's delivering. So a lot of moms don't even really notice when they're delivering their placenta. I also want to make a very important point here. You can see it's a pretty large size. It's about the size of a large dinner plate. And I want to think about this for a moment with you. Now imagine if you were walking around in the world and you had a dinner plate sized wound on the side of your thigh, for instance, and people saw you out in the world and they saw this wound. They would say, "What are you doing out? You need to be resting. You need to heal. You need to get better from this wound." Well, it's very similar. Mothers have this dinner plate sized wound on the inside of their uteruses. And because we can't see it, we don't really think about it. So we expect mothers to just jump back into regular life, to be getting back to her regular routine very quickly. And you got to think about how she's actually going to need to heal this large wound on the inside of her uterus. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So think about those new moms in your life that have just pushed out a baby or just had a baby in general. It could be through C-section. That she is healing this large dinner plate sized wound on the inside of her uterus. So she deserves a little bit of extra rest, extra patience, extra love, extra care. So let's make sure that new moms get what they need. In other parts of the world, not the United States, it is very traditional for new mothers who have just had a baby to take more than a month off to recover from birth, because those cultures recognize that it takes a lot for a mother to regain her strength, to heal this wound, to go through all of the processes, the hormonal changes that birth and having a new baby brings about for her. So let's always keep that in mind with our new moms. So a little bit earlier, I talked about the cervix going through dilation and effacement. And so this is going to illustrate for you exactly what this means. So you see here on the left side, just above early labor, you see that cervix with that little squishy, it kind of juts out there, and it's not open very much at all. And as early labor begins, you can see that it's beginning to open up just a little bit, and it's thinning. Obviously, it doesn't have that little nub on the end of it. So it begins thinning, which is effacement or effacing, before it starts to dilate. So then you can see, as we move along a little bit under active labor, you can see there that it's thinned out even more. The cervix is thinned out even more. And you can see it's opening up a little bit more. So you'll hear when you are talking to an obstetrician or a midwife or a nurse, you'll hear things about dilation and effacement. And maybe you're in early labor and they'll say, "Oh, you're 1 or 2 centimeters dilated." And that's wonderful news to hear. But it is very important to understand that effacement is the thing that needs to happen first. That cervix needs to become very thin in order for it to effectively dilate so that baby can come out. So while it's wonderful that you're showing progress, you do want to keep in mind that effacement is the thing that you really need to have happen before you can have some effective dilation for that baby. So you see there it's thinning under active labor, and then as you move to transition, which is very close to the time when you're ready to push the baby out, you can see that cervix has gotten very, very thin. It's almost paper thin. And it's dilated now to somewhere between 8 and 10 centimeters, which means very close to pushing phase or right at pushing phase. And once you reach that 10 centimeters of dilation, then your nurse or midwife or your OB will tell you it's time to push. So whenever you hear about dilation and effacement, you'll have a really good idea of what that all means from these pictures here. And you'll know that effacement is so important that that needs to happen first before you can have truly effective dilation for that baby's head. Another term that you will probably hear at some point from your midwife or your labor and delivery nurse or your obstetrician is station. So let's talk about what are stations. So when you hear about stations, it's referring to this, you can see this diagram here. It's the placement of the baby's head in the mother's pelvis. So negative numbers like -1 or -1, that means that the baby's head is higher in the pelvis. -3 would be much higher than -1. And then positive numbers like +1, +2, +3 means that the baby's head is lower. And of course, when you're at +3, you are at pushing phase. That baby's head is coming out. So when you hear stations, you'll know exactly what they're referring to. Now, I want to talk about something that we describe in the world of birth as the 4 P's of labor and birth. And this little diagram helps to give you a bit of an illustration of it. So let's start at the upper left corner there. That's the powers. That's the uterine activity. What is the strength of the contractions? You need really productive, strong contractions in order to be able to push that baby down and to open, efface, and dilate that cervix. And then we move around to the passage, which the passage is the birth canal. And that includes both soft tissues, like the vagina and the cervix and the vagina, but it also includes the pelvis, the bony pelvis. And while the pelvis is a bit of a restrictor during birth, we'll talk a little bit more about it later. There is flexibility to that pelvis. The pelvis can open up a certain amount to accommodate the baby's head. And then you have the passenger. And the passenger is our baby. Babies are smart. They want to do the things that they need to do in order to be born. They have to work hard to rotate themselves so that they can get in the right position to come through that birth canal. And they are active participants. They're not just simply sitting there just waiting to be born. They are a part of the whole birthing process. And then there's also the psyche, and that's essentially the mother's state of mind. And this is so incredibly important. I stress this a lot to new parents, that mom needs to feel good about the birthing experience. She needs to be well supported by the people around her. If you remember, that was one of the items at the very beginning that I talked about. It's so important for a mother to surround herself with people who support her birth wishes and her breastfeeding wishes. And the mother also needs to feel like she is in control, that she is being listened to, that she is loved, and that she has the power and ability to push this baby out. Or if she's having a C-section, that she has the power to make the decisions that are best for her baby, to be there and to care for her baby after it's born. So these 4 P's, we'll come back to them. They are so incredibly important to the birth process. So how do you know when you're in true labor? One of the things that you will begin to feel somewhere in your 3rd trimester is called Braxton Hicks contractions. Braxton Hicks contractions are a tightening of the belly, and it can be uncomfortable at times. And when they first start happening, it can actually surprise you. You think, wow, what is going on with my belly? But they are not true labor. They are considered practice contractions. Your body is just preparing. It's getting ready. It knows what it will be doing in the coming weeks, and it knows that that uterus is going to be working hard, and it needs to get a little bit of practice in of tightening. But Braxton Hicks will not start labor, and they are not true labor contractions. So how do you know if you're feeling Braxton Hicks contractions? What you can do is when you start feeling them, you can start moving around, start walking, be active in some way. And you can also, if you're lying in bed and you feel Braxton Hicks contractions, you can turn on to the other side. So if you're lying on one side, turn to the other side. If those Braxton Hicks contractions go away when you start to move or you change positions, then you know that they are just simply Braxton Hicks contractions, which is just practice contractions. So just remember that if you start to feel them, you can move around or you can change positions. And if you notice that they go away, they are Braxton Hicks contractions. Now, what are true contractions like? When you're in early labor, true contractions might feel a little bit like Braxton Hicks contractions. So let's take a look at them. True contractions may be irregular early on, but what that means is that when you have a real contraction in early labor, you may notice that there will be maybe 5 minutes between some of them, and then there may be 15 minutes between them. There may be 10 minutes between them, and then there may be 12 minutes between them. So you'll notice that they'll be very irregular. There will not be a set time between each contraction. And when you feel those, it could mean early labor, but it doesn't mean that you're in active labor and that birth is imminent. True contractions will get longer, they will get stronger, and they will get closer together, but this does take many hours to happen. So you may be feeling initially that you're having contractions every 15 minutes, or you'll have them in 15 minutes, and then you'll have them in 12 minutes, and then you'll have them in 17 minutes. And then let's say that this has been happening for a few hours, and then you start to notice that, okay, all of a sudden they're very consistent. Now they're happening every 15 minutes, or they're happening every 10 minutes. And you want to make sure that you're timing them. I would not necessarily recommend just looking at the clock necessarily, because you can be busy. You might be busy with other things. You might be at work. You might be doing things around your home. So what I recommend is to download a contraction timer for your phone. They're often just a few bucks, maybe $5 or less, in either the Google Play Store or in the Apple Store. Get it for your phone and just hit the button when a contraction starts, and then hit it again when your contraction is over. And it will give you a report that is wonderfully helpful in determining how often are my contractions. Another reason that a contraction timer is so incredibly helpful is because if you call your labor and delivery department, they will ask you, how often are your contractions? How frequent? How far apart? And if you aren't able to look at your app and see the report, it makes it a little bit harder to give your labor and delivery department a good answer to that question. So I definitely recommend getting a contraction timer. You also can tell that they're true contractions because walking around can actually make them stronger. And when you lie down and you're resting, true contractions do not go away. So let's talk about pregnancy hormones. Oxytocin. This is also called the love hormone. And this is something that you share with your loved ones when you stroke a loved one's cheek, when you hug, when you hold hands, when you cradle your baby. You are releasing oxytocin. And oxytocin naturally creates feelings of love and connection with those that you care about. And it's an extremely important hormone in pregnancy and in labor and birth. It also circulates throughout the baby's bloodstream and protects it from low levels of oxygen during birth. Because baby, let's face it, during labor and birth, baby is getting squeezed. Now, baby has plenty of oxygen because remember, there's also the umbilical cord that connects baby to mom. So mom continues to provide nutrients to the baby through the placenta and the umbilical cord. But it's always good to have hormones like oxytocin that are there to protect the baby during birth. Beta endorphins are hormones that relieve stress and pain in the mother. Catecholamines are a hormone that help mother and baby both feel alert. Now remember, earlier I mentioned that Baby is an active member of the whole birth process. Baby isn't just hanging out there waiting to be squeezed out of the mom. Baby is there participating and knows that it has a role, and it does it just instinctively. And catecholamines help that baby stay alert, especially since labor can take a while. And mother and baby can, they're working hard, and there's often not a lot of sleep and rest going on during active labor. But catecholamines can help baby and mom keep going through the challenges of labor. Catecholamines also protect the baby's heart and brain during contractions. Like I mentioned, contractions are really squeezing that baby, but baby stays safer when it has those catecholamines in its bloodstream. Prolactin. This is the mothering hormone. And prolactin is the hormone that kicks in after a baby is born and has an opportunity to latch onto the mother's breast. This releases the prolactin that tells mother's body that it needs to start producing milk. And it also helps it when a mother nurses, that hormone, the prolactin, also helps mom feel very connected with baby, and she feels that great desire to take good care of her baby. So what triggers labor? What is the secret there? How does labor even begin? So here's how it starts. Baby is ultimately the deciding factor as to when labor is going to begin. Baby, like I said, is not just hanging out there just waiting to be born. Baby's body knows when its lungs are mature, and its body then releases hormones that go through the placenta into the mother's body. Those hormonal messages then cause the uterus and the placenta to release prostaglandins, and prostaglandins cause the cervix to begin to thin and open. Like I mentioned earlier, the effacement, that thinning of the cervix, and of course dilation is the opening of it. The mother's body then, once it gets that message from the baby's body that the lungs are mature, the mother's body then produces oxytocin, and her uterus becomes very sensitive to that oxytocin. And then that intensifies the contractions, and the contractions begin to squeeze and push baby down. At the beginning of our session today, I talked about how it's important to let labor begin on its own. Why? Well, because we know that baby's lungs are ready for birth. Baby sent that message through the placenta to the mother's body to say, hey, my lungs are ready to breathe room air. We also know that that message that went to the mother's body then sent hormonal messages to the uterus and told the uterus, let's get ready, it's time to start pushing baby out. So we know that when the baby's lungs are ready for birth, then the uterus is also prepared to push out the baby. We also know from all those hormonal messages that the mother's body is ready to nourish that baby through breastfeeding. Those hormonal messages include prolactin, like I mentioned in the previous slide, and that helps the mother's body prepare to make milk for the baby. 39 weeks is critical to baby's development. You really want to try to get your baby to 39 weeks of pregnancy before it's born. And that's because the baby's lungs, heart, liver, and brain are mature. Like I mentioned earlier, the baby's lungs are ultimately the deciding factor that say that this baby is ready to be born. And that's when the messages begin being sent to the mother's body that we need to prepare, it's time to push this baby out. The baby is less likely to have hearing and vision problems if it can make it to 39 weeks of pregnancy. The baby's also better able to regulate its body temperature in the real world if it's made it to 39 weeks of pregnancy. The baby is able to suck and swallow. It's developed those muscles to be able to do that. And that's so incredibly important, of course, because baby needs to be able to get colostrum and then breast milk from the mother after birth. So how can you stay healthy during pregnancy? Of course, eat a healthy diet and drink plenty of water throughout the day. Now, eating a healthy diet is going to vary from person to person. I would recommend trying to reduce your fast food intake, and focus on eating more vegetables, more fruits, eating more complex carbohydrates, whole wheat, things like that. And as far as water goes, water is so incredibly important because baby is essentially swimming in its own little ocean all the time. And that fluid, that amniotic fluid, is always being replenished. And the fluid that you drink helps to replenish those fluids that baby is swimming around in during the entire pregnancy. It's also important to drink a lot of water to flush out your kidneys. Pregnant women are at a little bit higher risk for kidney stones, and the more water you drink, the more you're flushing impurities out of your kidneys, and the less likely they are to produce stones. You want to exercise regularly. Now, if you didn't exercise before you got pregnant, it is okay to start moderate exercise in your pregnancy. You want to be really careful. I would not recommend just immediately starting to run a mile or two a day. I would start out slow, maybe walk a mile, and then you can see how you feel. So make sure that you do moderate exercise if you haven't exercised previously. Wash your hands well after you change baby diapers. If you have another baby you take care of, you need to be very careful about not transferring any germs from that baby to you and your baby. Do not kiss young children on the face, because those of us who have raised children know that they carry all kinds of respiratory germs, and you really want to avoid that. Do not share your food or eating utensils with children. And avoid cleaning cat litter pans if you can. But if you can't, use gloves. And always avoid sick cats. You do not want to pick up any illnesses from cats while you're pregnant. And when you're gardening, make sure you wear gloves. There are some potential bacteria and viruses in the dirt or in the soil that you do not want to catch while you're pregnant. It's important to know the warning signs that you should call your care provider during your pregnancy and labor. After 20 weeks of pregnancy, if you experience headaches or blurred vision, swelling of your hands or face, shortness of breath, upper stomach pain, or if something just doesn't feel right, please call your care provider right away. Call your midwife, call your obstetrician, call your labor and delivery department. These symptoms could be a sign of preeclampsia, which is a condition where the mother develops high blood pressure during or after pregnancy. So if you experience any of these symptoms before and shortly after your birth, then please do let your care provider know immediately. Some other things that you'll want to notify your care provider about are things like spotting. Now, if you experience brown spotting early in pregnancy, sometimes it can just simply be a little bit of tissue that is dislodged while the egg burrows its way into the uterine lining. But it certainly doesn't hurt for you to tell your care provider, your midwife, your OB, a nurse in the labor and delivery department, that you're experiencing some brown spotting. If you discover red bleeding anytime during your pregnancy, call your care provider immediately. If you have bleeding in your third trimester, which means week 27 or later, go to the nearest emergency room and let them know that you are pregnant, you are over 27 weeks, that you're in your third trimester, and that you're experiencing bleeding. So what are we going to learn in our next class? Can you have a pain-free labor and birth? How can your birth partner help you have your best birth? Let's put together your birth plan. I'll provide templates. How a doula can help you and when you should call or text your doula. So join me for our next class. I look forward to seeing you. And if you have questions, post them in the comments below. Thank you so much.
If you're located in the Sacramento, California area, you can also take classes with me in person. Watch this tutorial to find out how you can register.
To sign up for classes, visit southgaterecandpark.net and visit the Recreation menu. Click on Register for Programs, then scroll down on the next page and click on the Register Now button. Go up to the Activities menu in the upper left-hand corner and click on Special Interest Classes. You'll see Childbirth Education pop up at the top. Click View Sub-Activities to see the available classes, and then click on an individual class to read the description, the dates, and the times. And when you're ready to sign up, click Create an Account in the upper right-hand corner, enter your email address, and then follow the prompts to register.
I look forward to seeing you back here at this channel, or in person if you decide to take classes with me. Watch the video series so that you too can have the best birth for your family. Have a beautiful day.